For inviting me to have an opportunity to speak here. I am from Northwestern University. I work a lot with Audiosyn Mater, who spoke yesterday in the morning. We work a lot in studying the structure of networks and its implication, particularly for dynamics, and he focused in particular in his talk on controlling network system. One of the main focus themes that we study in our group is how the network structure, when you have a system of coupled dynamical units interacting with each other with some non-trivial network structure, how does the topology of the network, the structure of the network, affects dynamics? And this has obviously consequence in control. But this fundamental question of how the structure of the network is related to dynamics is still an open question. There's a lot of question about this. Just to illustrate how this is relevant in many situations, many different kinds of networked systems from different disciplines. Here's an example of a picture that I think we've seen already. A network of Facebook friendships all over the world. Obviously, this is a complex web of connections between people, social network, and this has certainly implication in dynamics. I'm just going to show you one example of that dynamics here. This is one of those Facebook apps that you could you might be invited to use, or in this case just to participate in some sort of survey that the app invite you to do. And this shows the time sequence of how accepting and doing that survey spreads over the network of friendship. So underlying this is a topology of who is connected to whom in a network of a bunch of people. I think the red is female, blue is male, I think, in this particular network, and it's showing how it spreads over those links, the friendships defined as the friendships in connections in Facebook. In this case, another example is a network of neurons in the brain, and this also has obviously connections. Now we have starting to emerge huge data sets on how those neurons are connected. Some insights about the topological network structures under things like Connectome project. And a few others that's started and starting to become available, and so this also has as an implication in the dynamics of individual neurons. And what neuron does is to basically receives a electrical signal from other neurons in the network. And it changes the electrical potential on its membrane, and when that sort of reaches the threshold, it spikes. That's how they describe this. It creates its own electrical signal that then gets sent out through axons, those outgoing links to other neurons in the network. So how this dynamics takes place certainly is going to depend on the structure of the network. Another example, which in particular Audiosyn and I have been studying a lot in terms of synchronization dynamics, and the real example of that is the power grid that we all depend on to be here and do this talk for me and for you to listen with the lights and the projectors and so on is in the North America, well, particularly in the U.S. is what where I am. So I'm showing you the picture of that. This is actually, I don't know how good it turned out on the screen, but it's a cool picture of just the transmission lines that connects different buses. That's how the power systems engineers call the nodes in the network. Different points in the network that are connected by transmission lines that transfers power from one point in the grid to another. And I'm actually showing here just the links between those buses, the nodes. But you can see how this covers the entire U.S. and also some parts of Canada, as well as a little piece of Mexico in the south. So you see how it covers the entire continent and makes the map sort of visible in this picture. So the dynamics that takes place on that network is how the voltages at those different points, the nodes, the buses in the network changes in time. In particular, the generators. Those generators are mechanical oscillating things for many of those oscillators. These days there are also other kinds as well, like the renewable sources would act in different ways. But the voltages, if you look at the voltages at different points in the network, these are oscillating quantities because you have to describe them as complex values that has amplitude and the phase angles. Okay, that's how the electrical engineers typically, that's the representation that they usually use to describe how voltages changes in time. And one of the basic requirements for us to be able to take advantage of this system, to get the power generated in some part of the grid and consumed in another part of the grid, is to have all those oscillations synchronized. In the North American, in this grid, it's a 60 hertz. In other parts of the world, it's 50 hertz. That all that oscillation has to happen at the same frequency. It's approximately 60 hertz. It doesn't have to be 60 hertz in this in the U.S., but they all have to be oscillating at the same frequency. In fact, you can actually there are measurements on those frequency at different parts of the grid, and here I'm going to show you how the dynamics of the instantaneous frequencies could be perturbed when something happens in the power grid, and this is sort of the thing that we don't want to happen. This is a particular example of a San Diego blackout that happened in 2011. So here's the frequency, and it's the frequency distribution over this western part of the grid. Obviously there's some interpolation that goes on because not every point on the map has a piece of a power grid, but that gives you an idea of how frequency dynamics takes place, and it's distributed over geographical space as well as over the topology of the network. And what we studied is the stability of synchronization of these frequencies of the generators in particular, and how that is related to the structure of the network. So that's the work that I've done recently, but I'm not going to talk about that today, really, but just to show you how network structure, understanding the network structure is important in understanding the dynamics. And this is really, for us at least, is the motivation to study topological structure of the network to begin with. So the thing about the real networks, including examples of the power grid, the neural networks, and Facebook friendship network, as well as Twitter, is that it really has a very complex structure that may be difficult to understand, but they all somehow have some sort of internal structure that may give us some insight. In fact, in social network, it's clear that we certainly have some sort of social groups that are drive the formation of those links between people, and maybe creating this type of perhaps a hierarchical structure of groups. If you go to another example of biological nature, food web, for example, it certainly has this trophic structure that gives you a hierarchical order in which predator-prey relationships could be sort of understood. Another example is the perhaps internet, the network of computers and routers and all sorts of devices. Depending on what devices you have, they may be grouped into several different types that represents different functionalities within the network that has to work as a whole somehow. So one key thing is to understand the dynamics, in particular, things that we are interested in. Well, to do that, we need to also understand, it seems to me at least, that it is important to understand the structure like those that lies in the network structure itself. To give you one more example from the stuff that we looked at, the power grid, in particular, the oscillations of those frequencies that I've shown you an example of have, in some cases, could be understood by having, in terms of having sort of groups of nodes in the network that are sort of acting together, closer together somehow, that induces coherent oscillations of those frequencies. Power system engineers, in fact, call them coherent oscillations. And this has been observed, and it suggests that the network structure, the structure of the connection between different buses in the network through transmission lines have implications of that sort. So, most of the works so far in trying to understand this internal structure of the networks in the field of network science has been focused on something called communities. These are basically groups of nodes within the network that are more densely connected among themselves inside that group than to outside of the group. So more sparsely connected to other nodes outside the group, but within themselves they are closer together. So this is a very natural structure to think about within the social network. And this, I think, is one of the motivations that got started with the people like Gervin and Newman, a seminal paper who studied both biological and social networks, and basically posed this problem of identifying these type of groups of nodes in the network, and propose a simple solution by posing it as an optimization problem, at least to some extent. They formulated something called the modularity function, which basically measures how much more links you have within a given group. So suppose you divide the network into a certain number of groups, and given that division, you measure how many connections you have in each group, and compare that to what you would expect to have, how much of the connection you would expect to have if you had chosen the links randomly, disregarding the structure, group structure. So you can write that down as what they call the modularity function, and you try to maximize that function to say that within the groups we have a lot more than to find the division in such a way that within each group you have much more, as much as possible, in fact, the optimization problem, as much as possible of links within the groups than outside. So that got started in their papers, and lots of people within the network science community has started to look at this problem. People have come up with different algorithm to detect those things, and there are many, many interesting aspects of the detection problem itself. And I think Filippo, after will be speaking after me, will touch on very interesting problems related to this. Sorry that I don't have your papers listed here, but I wanted to focus on particularly on in the beginning of how things started in this line of work, as well as those that are sort of relevant to the stuff that I want to discuss here, which is people have thought of a way to extend that idea of just having the groups of densely connected nodes to a bit more general setting. And in particular, this Newman Light paper in PNAS have tried to formulate the problem as of identifying groups that are defined by how links are distributed with respect to those group structure, not just to have more dense connections within, but patterns of link distribution. And applied a machine learning algorithm called expectation maximization algorithm. It proposed that as one algorithm to identify those type of structures. So I'm going to take even further step to try to define groups in a very general way, and we decided to call that structural groups. Group of nodes that share some common properties among them that distinguish them from other nodes outside the group. And that could be having dense connection between them in some way, but it could be a lot of different other things. So what you could do is to basically look at the list of properties that you could compute node by node, like degree, which is basically just you count the number of connections each node has. So each node would have a number that characterizes the degree of that node. Clustering coefficient is measuring how connected the node's neighbors are. So if you how likely is your friends connected with each other. There's a number to measure that, clustering coefficient. Betweenness centrality measures how sort of central you are in the network, in the sense that if everybody in the network is trying to communicate with each other by sending packets of some sort, through shortest path in the network, then how many of those packets would pass by you is a measure of centrality of a node in the network, and the one that I just described is what's called the betweenness centrality. But there are other ways to measure centrality. Subgraph centrality is another measure of centrality based on the number of closed cycles that exist in the network. Another one is more linear algebra based measure based on eigenvector structure of what's called the Laplacian eigenvectors. This is all that together with a slightly different version of the Laplacian matrix called the normalized Laplacian matrix is related to the random walks on the network. So this is actually somewhat related to the PageRank, Google PageRank, that is based on this idea of random walks and what the probability is of a random clickers visiting that particular site in the context of web pages. Shortest path, you could measure for each node how far the other nodes are in terms of the shortest path between that node and those other nodes. So you can think of all kinds of other measures that might be of interest to you if you're looking at the network in a particular context. You could, in principle, put any of those plus the average of any of those quantities over the neighbors of the node. That will give you another sort of independent set of measure for that particular node. So, and the second neighbors, you could average over the second neighbors to do the same thing. And so that would map each node in the network into a high-dimensional space that I call a node property space. Each coordinate would represent a node property, degree, the average degree of the neighbors, clustering coefficient, eigenvector component of Laplacian matrix, things like that. And so once you map the network into that space, you can what we do is to define the structure groups as the clusters of points in that node property space. Okay, so the way I picture this, it's clear that there are 3 clusters, I hope. So in general, just to point out that this is more general than the community detection. The community detection method, I mentioned thousands of different. I didn't mention. I mentioned that there are lots of different ways that people have come up to detect communities in the sense of having groups of densely connected nodes in the network. But none of those is going to be able to identify things like this because they are designed specifically to detect those nodes that are connected well. In fact, more than others. So it's really not designed to capture clusters in this space. On the other hand, you could take this space, node property space, and apply one of those machine learning clustering algorithm to try to detect those clusters in the space. But those also have their own issues. And so what I decided to take as an approach to solve this problem is to take inspiration from the visual analytics, hence the title of the talk, which is in fact, I see that the next slide isn't about that. I'm going to tell you a bit about that in a few slides. But before going there, I want to show you that the taking advantage. The visual analytics, what it does is to take advantage of the human visual capability to do pattern recognition. To demonstrate, I'm going to do a little experiment here to see how well you would do a pattern recognition. So what I'm going to do is to show you another example like this and see how quickly you could recognize how many groups of points you would recognize. And what I want to do is I'm going to show you on the count of 3, this next plot. And I want you to clap as soon as you identify the number of groups that you see in the slide. Okay, is that clear to all of you? So let's see. 1, 2, 3. I think that was very slow. I'm pretty sure. How many groups are in this? 3. 5? 3, okay. Maybe 5, I don't know. But 3, I think, is what it is in this case. Like this, right? And I think in your mind, I think this has a lot to do with the cognitive science side of all of this. You might not clap as soon as when you really recognize it. Maybe there's a time delay, but also there's a group dynamics here because you may not be, you might be too shy to actually clap, things that I would be. So maybe that's what it is. But I think this is very clear to human eyes. While this is not actually trivial for one of the most common machine learning clustering algorithm that's out there. which is called k-means. If you apply the k-means clustering algorithm, this is what you get, which is clearly wrong. I'm sure you can see. And the reason is, in this case, the k-means algorithm, what it does, in fact, in a nutshell, is for given division into groups, it basically computes how spread the points are within each of those groups by measuring the variance in that space. And it tries to minimize that by changing the way you divide the points into groups. And so this happens to be the solution to that problem. In fact, the variance of the red points plus the variance of the blue points, the variance of the green points are actually minimized in this case. Okay, so the k-means actually is a greedy algorithm to try to minimize that optimization problem in this case. So in general, the k-means has the problem of dividing correctly groups that may have a sort of elongated shape. When you have a nonlinear shape, in general, it's a tough problem to do. The clustering problem on things like that is generally a difficult problem. So this plot, in fact, comes from the network example, an example of network, and it actually looks like this. And if you plot them correctly, well, it's certainly not clear what the three groups are when you lay them out this way. But when you plot it in that property space, and right now it's on this slide, I'm showing a projection onto two particular node properties, degree and the average degree of the neighbors, and you see that you could characterize those things in terms of those two particular node properties. And so that's what you saw a few seconds ago, and be able to identify immediately what it was. And so you could use this type of grouping to do the visualization that is sort of informative because you can characterize each of those groups in terms of the properties of the connection to other nodes in the network. I just wanted to point out that this is different from the community structure the way I defined it, because the blue, although it may look in this visualization like they are connected well, that's just because there are lines that are overlapping with each other in this case. But the way I identify that group doesn't care about whether they are connected or not. In fact, in this blue group, it's the connection between them are very sparse, and it's precisely characterized by something different, as you saw in this plot. So the method that I used to come up with that takes advantage of a completely different approach that I'm going to sort of motivate here, is to use random projection of this high dimensional space. The problem that you have in trying to take advantage of the visual recognition ability of humans is that you can only do this with two dimensions in a two-dimensional projection, or maybe three. But on a computer screen, if you want the user to contribute to this, it would have to be two dimensions. So what I did is to take advantage of that, integrating into a software that you could use to analyze a given network. But to motivate this random projections that I decided to use, let's take a very simple example of two cluster points generated randomly, but with some distance between them. And let's see how likely it is that the random projection would allow you to see the separation between the two groups. And I do this in 28-dimensional space because that's the number of node properties that I decided to use in the study of some selections of networks that I'm going to show you some example of later. And let's denote by P the probability that a random projection onto a two-dimensional space would be separable by a line in that projection. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So I'm going to see what the probability that it is separable in that particular choice of projection. And in this probability, when you have a cluster that is high dimensional, 28 dimensional in general, is not very high. So you might be wondering why I made that choice. It turns out that it depends a lot on the sort of effective dimension of this object that you're trying to separate. In reality, many of those clusters have effectively smaller dimension. So if you, for example, in fact, I realized a few minutes ago that this was switched. If you reduce the variance in all the dimensions other than 10 directions, so if you switch this in your mind, I reduced in 18 directions, and I only kept the 10 directions to have the larger variance. So it's effectively a 10-dimensional object in 28-dimensional space. I know it's hard to imagine this; it's too high of a dimension. But if you do the math, you could compute the probability that, or at least you could do a simulation and a computer and Monte Carlo estimation of what the probability is. It's about 0.017, which is small but much bigger than what I had before. And what I do is to enhance that further by doing sort of a random bias sample of random two-dimensional projections by first taking a bunch of one-dimensional projection and computing a heuristic measure of how clustered the points are in this one-dimensional projection, and using that information to sort of direct the selection of random two-dimensional projections in such a way that it's more likely to project along the directions in which the separation is much more visible. But so this very heuristic, but it gives you an advantage. And in fact, this probability that I was talking about would increase dramatically. In this particular simple example, it would be 0.68. And one more thing that acts quite a bit on my side is the fact that if you do a few random projections and combine the result, then you can actually increase the chance of finding that separation into groups by quite a bit. In fact, just by doing 7 projections and making sure that you ask what's the probability that you at least see the separation into those 2 groups in at least one of those projections, then the probability that happens is actually 99 point something %, very close to 1. So with that in mind, I sort of, as I said, taken inspiration from visual analytics, which sort of is a conceptual approach that combines the statistics and exploratory statistics with analytical methods. So here I'm not necessarily, most of those things tends to be a way of visualizing the data in such a way that the user could adjust the visualization, and the visualization is based on analytics. That's the analytics part of it, and the user will be able to adjust those things on the fly to try to get an insight from it. So this is more of a visualization plus interaction with the user that allows the user to get more information out of it. Here I'm doing a slightly different thing where I'm actually trying to take advantage of the human capability and include that in the analytical part of the process to give us an advantage in identifying structure in the network that would not be possible by either of those components alone. automatic algorithms like k-means wasn't able to identify something that we were able to identify quickly. But on the other hand, the human can only do these things in 2 dimensions. So I'm combining those things to get something that neither of them can do alone. So here's basically the method, how the method works. And so you take this node property space, you project it to randomly chosen two-dimensional space. So I think I've seen that. And then the user presented with, I have this software developed to have the user select the groups that they see in a particular projection, so that the user could go through different projections that are randomly chosen, and then provide feedback onto the algorithm as to what they see. Not all projections would give you a clear separation. So in that case, you could say, oh, no, I don't see anything. But then when you do see, you get this input. So what this gives the algorithm is that every time sees something and separates the nodes into groups, you would get a vector of how the assignment of into groups are. So each vector here corresponds to a particular projection and its corresponding inputs from the user. And by doing that for multiple projections, you would end up with a bunch of vectors, which then will be processed by. Oh, by the way, so I'm basically just calling the rows vector because when you look at it that way, each node gets a vector of different assignment into groups. Right? So that's what I'm calling the group assignment vectors. So when you do that, each node gets a different. Now it's a different coordinates points. Each node is now represented as a point in a different coordinate system, where each coordinate now is not directly related to those node properties, but now it's related to how the user's feedback, what the user's feedback was. Now you can put these vectors into a clustering algorithm. Like in this case, I used what's called a hierarchical clustering, which outputs a tree like this called a dendrogram. It basically starts out. You could do it in two different ways. You could start with all the group nodes in the single group and decide where to cut. In fact, what I ended up doing was the other way around. You start from every node, separated into separate groups, and then you decide which one to. Each step you would decide which one to agglomerate and build from bottom to up. So by doing that, every time you put together two different groups as a single group, you would see the lines connect to each other, and that creates a tree of how, when you see it from top-down view, how the entire set of nodes divides hierarchically into different groups. Okay, so that's called the hierarchical clustering, and to decide which one to agglomerate, you could use a measure of distance between those vectors. So this is a measure of distance between two nodes in a network, not directly computed based on the node properties, but based on how the users, how the particular user that provided the feedback clustered them. The measure of distance between the nodes according to that feedback. Right. So then you can cut at any level this tree, and in this case you could it would produce three different groups. You could basically, in principle, cut anywhere, but to provide an automatic way of deciding where the right place to cut. One possible way to do that. This is to define something that okay. I think I have to speed up a little bit then. Is to define some quality, something that measures the quality of the grouping, which I don't want to go into detail because of the time, I guess. But it basically measures how spread each group are within each group. Actually, how spread the distance between the group centers of the groups are relative to how spread within each group the nodes are, and so that heuristic measure typically gives you a sort of a big jump in the big drop in the quality measured according to this measure, and so I suggest that you cut right above that, and because just above that, it will be the coarsest level at which the quality of the grouping is still good. Okay, so that's how I basically come up with this division, and so it's an example of a good match between them. So let's see. given that I don't have that much time, I will simply mention that I've benchmarked this method by starting from looking at the family of networks that are created with the prescribed groups, with a sort of a mixed community structure and a difference in the internal structure of the groups. And I may not go into detail here, but I just want to show this plot that basically shows that against other methods, including k-means and the Newman-Leicht that method that they proposed in the paper that I mentioned earlier, we at the point where other start to degrade its performance, our method keeps its performance relatively high. And what's interesting here that I want to point out is the fact that RIS are the method that I just described. But if I replace the human component in this method with k-means algorithm applied to the projections, it actually gives you something better than what the others. And that suggests that there's something actually, some advantage in the way I projected points into a lower dimensional space. Even when it's random, somehow it's giving an advantage. So it's an interesting thing that we found. So just to show you some real world examples, start from a small thing. This is the network of karate club that those original papers by Newman and Gervin studied. Data collected by Zachary of a karate crowd that eventually split up in two groups. And so they used the community detection algorithm to sort of predict what the split would be, and they do that. But I apply the method that I described in this network, and what I found is something a bit different. Let's see. I realized that I didn't show the split into the. How come I don't have that here? I don't know. But I think the split is something like this here. Which actually shows up in this layout quite well. But what I find is a different grouping of nodes, a split of the members of the club into sort of a central nodes that are well connected with others. And then there are a bunch of people who are not necessarily well connected, but they are connected to those well connected people. And then there's sort of one community up there that are only connected among themselves, except for those that are connected to the single person, which is who is also well connected. In fact, the most well, at least one of the two most connected people in this club. So the method actually is general. Enough that it captures a different division of the network into two groups that is based not necessarily on how they are connected, but how the neighbors are connected, for example, or what the roles of those members are within the club. Let me skip this one. This is just another way of visualizing and analyzing the same data. The results of the method. Here's another example of a network of American college football teams, and this is another example from Gerver and Newman, where let me just go to this one. It was the grouping that I found. It turns out that my method divides the network into 7 groups. Which is not the same as the way in which those conferences of college football in U.S. is organized. It has, in fact, a bunch of different conferences, and so you see that some of the conferences are bunched together, and there are some, like number 6, that are spread across different groups that I found. But that actually makes sense because this one's actually not a conference, really. Those are the ones that are bunched together just because they don't belong to any of the other conferences. So, so what this basically turns out to be is that it's sort of a grouping that are correlated to the geographic distribution of those college teams. And so in some sense, it captured a higher order hierarchical organization when you combine with the results that you will get from the community detection, which gives you those conferences more or less. It gives you sort of a hierarchical picture of what the organization of this network is. So I will put up a summary here and stop and just say that I've introduced a sort of a general method that is inspired by visual analytics and discovers group structures. And one thing that I didn't point out during the talk was that it doesn't really require how many groups you're supposed to get. And many of those algorithms, including most of the community detection methods, are something that requires how many groups that you're looking for, or in the case of community detection, you're looking for a particular type of groups. And here, I don't really ask exactly what types of groups in terms of what node properties may characterize the groups. But in the process of doing this, applying this algorithm, the method, you would discover what those characteristics are. So it's sort of, in that sense, it's an exploratory method of analysis. And I've shown you that only briefly, though, that it outperforms the other methods. And I think that's curious, the fact that even when you replace the human user with the k-means, it still outperforms others, suggests the power of this sort of a multiplicative effect that comes from the fact that you're combining the results from multiple projections, somehow giving an advantage. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much for your attention.
Questions from the audience? Yes. Who wants to say?
Hi, very interesting talk. Thanks, Maxwell Ramstead from UQAM. I was wondering, you spoke in the beginning of your talk about the relation between structure and dynamics, and I was wondering, from these techniques, what can we infer about